is, in DS, is feminine, I thought, because it ends with an A, but it's really masculine, so you say buenos dias. But then in the afternoon, what do you say? Buenas tardes. Oh, you people are good already. And you see, I thought I was going to have a Spanish lesson here. And in the evening, buenas noches. Very good. Okay. Well, you know, I'm really not. I'm not a language teacher. In fact, I didn't learn to speak Spanish until I was 32 years old, which is too late to learn to speak a new language, but I did. I'm just a plain old music teacher, basically. You know, I've taught K through 12, and there never has been a semester at SAS Voyage on which I served as the executive team. I'm very proud to say on one voyage I did have a voyage as the academic team because the academic team got sick, so that was fun. But there was never a voyage on which I didn't get everybody to sing with me. And I can just tell by looking at all of you that you're all good singers. And what I was going to do, I was going to start out by teaching you children's music is one of my specialties, children's songs, that kind of thing. I'm going to teach you a children's song in Spanish, but there isn't enough time to teach you one. So I had to stop and think, gee, what kind of a song? I'll bet most of you know Este son las mañanitas que cantaba el rey David. You know that, it's the Mexican birthday song. You all know that? Oh, gee. Well, how about something, there are enough people, I think, in the audience right now who, are close to my age, not as old as I am, probably, but remember an old song, I think it came out in 1938, it was first published, some of you were around then. You know what, You Are My Sunshine? Yeah, I think, I'm just wondering if you're good enough to all sing it in the same key. So let me just try that. I would feel better up here speaking today if, I could relax a little bit and know that you can sing it. Just to hear a little bit of music, that'll make you relax. Something like, You Are My Sunshine. Okay, now let's start right again. So I want to make sure that we all sing and start on the same note. Because, isn't it fun going to a birthday party these days and then you start to sing Happy Birthday and you hear it in 7 different keys? And it wasn't quite like that when I was young, because when I was young, people did more singing. And in this day and age, people do more listening to music. Not as many people make music. Not as many people harmonize as they used to. But I think enough of you could do that. Let's just sing the first few phrases of this, but all together, no harmony yet. I'm going to ask for that later. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Okay, that's just enough. Okay, is that key okay for most people? Not too high, not too low. I was lucky, I just picked a good one. Okay, now what I'm going to let you do is, in barbershop quartetting, we have a kind of music called woodshedding, and that is when you harmonize by ear. You're not looking at a script. You're really being very creative in terms of harmony. And I know some of you can do that. So if you sing in a choir, you sing in a quartet, if you think you can put a bass to You Are My Sunshine, or a baritone, or a tenor, go ahead and try. And then I'll get on to the real subject at hand here, okay? So, a little harmony with this song. Let's see if we can get all the way through it so I can get started here. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. More bass over there, Lloyd. You make me happy when skies are gray, when skies are gray. You'll never know how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Give yourself a big hand. Okay, when I got the note from Lauren Crabtree about possibly giving a presentation, I was a little concerned because I knew I wasn't prepared to give a scholarly talk on academic affairs as it relates to semester at sea. But the way he presented it is, I could kind of tell some stories. I think he said a seaside chat or something like that. So I don't have anything fancy-dancy prepared. In fact, I'm going to kind of, speak just as things come to mind. I think I've got a little bit of organization in here, and I just hope that I don't forget to say some of the things that I would like to say. Here's what I'm going to try to do. And I shared some of what I want to do with one of our daughters, some of the family members would say, well, you're talking too much about yourself, you know, at the beginning there. And I really don't like to do that. But to tell you about how I became involved in Semester at Sea is a story I love to tell. I enjoy telling it to my grandchildren sometimes too. But I remember when I was a kid and when I heard stories from some of the elders in my family, I was listening. I was on the edge of my seat listening to everything. But now when I try to tell some of these stories to my grandkids, they seem to be very interested for a minute. And then before I look over and they're, you know, I've got competition now. You know, it's technical age, and that's fine. So, but it still works. So anyway, what I thought I would do is many people ask me, how did I become involved with Semester at Sea? And I always mention this to a lot of them when I ask them, you know, how did you become involved with Semester at Sea? And some will say, oh, it's very easy. You know, my study abroad advisor said, oh, you'd love this program. There aren't too many of those out there, always, but, or maybe something they saw on a calendar or a brochure they picked up. But then others, really it took a number of different decisions or being in the right place at the right time to find out something about Semester at Sea. And that's what happened to me. So I thought I'd go through that very quickly if I could today. Then I'm going to try to touch upon a subject that was very dear to my heart, and that is the difference between a program like Semester at Sea, which is a multi-country program, and what do most study abroad advisors, I think, still talk about today is another way of doing study abroad. It's called the immersion, you know, where you go to one country, one culture. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit about some of my experiences as an employee of the Institute of Shipboard Education. And finally, touch upon 2 or 3 stories that came from different voyages. That's what I'm going to try to do. So anyway, let me start out by talking about the very first international experience I had. Didn't have any international experiences until I became an undergraduate student. I'm from the state of Maine, live out in the woods there in Maine, and really never thought too much about going abroad, but there were a couple of things that really told me I should at least try to get to Europe sometime. One of those is that as a music major, as an undergraduate student, of course, I was 95% of the time in class for 4 years. It was all about those famous European composers, Johann Sebastian Bach and Mozart and Bizet and all these others. So it was all kind of based on Europe. And so I got to thinking, gee, it would be very nice if I could, you know, see where these people came from. And I knew that they had museums back there in their birthplaces and lots of very interesting. I've always been interested in history, so I thought that would be good. Then there was a second thing that really made me think more about Europe, and that is I had a number of ancestors, a couple of them, 3 or 4 I remember, who came from Europe, because I'm a little bit Irish. Actually, I'm half Irish, although I have a German name with my paternal grandfather was from Germany, and a little English blood in there too. And so I remember some of these people telling stories to me when I was a little kid, especially my great-grandmother, who had a real Irish brogue. It was really an Irish brogue, and I was kind of fascinated just by that accent. You know, where did you get that out? And then I never knew my paternal grandparents because they passed away before I was born. But my paternal grandfather came from Kiel, Germany, in 1912, and he was a butcher, a meat cutter, sausage maker. And he realized after being in Maine, he ended up in Maine, where I was born and raised, that he needed help, so he sent for his brother, his younger brother, was my great-uncle Otto. And he used to speak to me a lot about his childhood in Germany. He came over in 1914, and so I became interested in that, and then I had an aunt Mabel who was from England. She came over about the same age. They were in their late teens, early 20s. And so they all had a bit of a road to them. So that fascinated me as being young. So I thought, gee, Europe is maybe another place. And then finally, the third thing, when I was in high school, I took 1 semester of Spanish, forgot it all, soon after that, and also 1 semester in French. And I was very interested in French. I really thought I was going to become a Francophile because I grew up in the southern part of Maine, which is very, even today, not quite like it was then, heavy populated with French Canadians. I heard more French growing up as a kid than I heard English in Bedford, Maine, where I was born. That course that I took in French, we were able to sign a little form and obtain a pen pal from France, and I did that. And so I had this pen pal, and I was writing back and forth to the whole family, and that convinced me I really should go. So what I did, I didn't have the money to go to Europe, but I was able to, through a friend, find someone in town who had done this when she was very young and thought she had some money, and so she gave me a call and said, gee, can I help you get to Europe? So that was part of it. I actually borrowed $1,500. And the first thing I purchased was something called a Eurail Pass. Any of you use that Eurail Pass? What a wonderful thing. I paid $180 for that thing. And the nice thing about the Eurail Pass, at least in those days, I don't know if it's anything like it today, but that was good for the first class compartment. And when you retired, I remember one night, I think I was, where was I? I think it was in Hanover, Germany, and looking over for a hostel, a place that I could stay, and I couldn't find a place to sleep. Well, I could sleep right there on the platform at the train station. But what I did instead is I hopped on a train, first class compartment, made my seat into a bed, because at night, overnight, not too many people in those first class compartments, and I slept my way down south to, I forgot where I went to, and woke up and went on the other side of the track and came back in time to do more money. But the other thing I did was, I guess I could call it my Bible. I bought one of those Bibles to take with me, on that trip, so I would be well prepared. And some of you may have purchased it. I think most college students who went in those days, they always had one of those under their arm. Where am I going? Let's see, how do I do this? Okay, Europe, summer of '62. It was the summer of '62 I did this. And that's important too, because what happened in 1963? John? All right. 1963 was kind of a special year for semester C, wasn't it? It's kind of when it really got started, 1963. Had I known, I would have waited a year. But I just didn't know, and that was, what was it called then? University of the Seven Seas, right? On a ship called, I believe, the Seven Seas, wasn't it? Anyways, but I didn't know. So anyway, so in '62 I decided to go, and anyway, talking about that Bible, I had to get it. Any of you use that? You're about $5 a day? Oh my goodness, that saved me, really. It was really very, very good book. Here's what Travel Magazine said about it. What is it? I'll let you read it. Can you read the words? In your possession of a copy of Europe on $5 a day must become conspicuous marketing of a traveling American from now on. Never previously has there been a guide book possessing quite the excellence of this and extraordinary practical work. So really, that was very important in my first experience. Now, I couldn't call it semester at sea, so I refer to this as semester on rails. That was my first experience. And it really wasn't quite like semester at sea, but it was a multi-country experience that I had. No, I wasn't surrounded by a score of scholarly faculty members. There was no global studies course I could go to, so it wasn't quite the same. But I learned so much on that voyage, comparative studies, going from one culture to another. So I really became convinced that this is a very good intellectual, academic way to learn something about another culture. Kind of the immersion experience is quite different from this kind of experience. Anyway, what did I do? Of course, I had to go to Paris because that's where I had this family. And I was only going to spend 3 days with them. I ended up spending 6 days. Then I was going to say goodbye. And at the end of the trip, well, by the way, I went for 3 months. 3 full months. And at the end of the trip, I was not going to come back to Paris, but then I liked Paris and French, and I wanted to be a Francophile, that I took away a little, I looked at my itinerary, and if I had 5 days in Denmark, it would turn down to 3, and that's why I have another whole week to go back to Paris. So I ended up in Paris, started in Paris. So, and of course, you have to go get leave if you go to Europe, so I went there. And of course, a little bit of was about my ancestry too. I had to go to the place where my Irish ancestors come from. And I didn't have the chance to go to Tipperary and County Cork, but I had a great time in Dublin, so at least I got there. Later, when I studied in Belfast, Northern Ireland, I was able to get out and really meet distant cousins. And of course, I had to go to Kiel, Germany, and that is where my grandfather's house was at the time. It was completely destroyed during the war, and so it wasn't there, but I got to meet his sister. And she had not seen him since he left, or the younger brother, who I knew was my great Uncle Otto, and she hadn't seen him in 50 years or so. And one of the great outcomes of this was I convinced her and a younger cousin to come and visit us, so she met her brother, who she hadn't seen for 50 years. So that's a whole other story that would take an hour to tell. And then, of course, some of my ancestors came from a very working class place in Birkenhead, England, right across the River Mersey from Liverpool. So I spent some time, found my cousins there, had a great time. So anyway, that was my experience. So I got back, and this was between my junior and senior year as an undergraduate student. And what did I do during that senior year? What was the only thing I could think about? Getting back overseas. How am I going to do that? And that was in 1963, the days of John F. Kennedy, and what was one of the great things he came up with was the Peace Corps. And so I put in an application. I didn't know if I would be accepted, and I was. I got that piece of paper, it came in the mail, and it said, congratulations, you're going to be going to a training session at Teachers College, Columbia, New York City, to go to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria. Nigeria, I said to myself, wow. Gee, I wanted to be sent to a French-speaking country so I could really become a francophone. But then I said to myself, well, at least I'm going to be learning Spanish. See, I didn't know I had a lot those days about international travel, did I? What country was I thinking about? Beginning with an N in Central America. Nicaragua. I thought that Nigeria was in Central America. That's how modest I was, so anyway, but now as I mentioned before, some of these links that lead to semester at sea, some of them I created myself at the beginning, like going to Europe. This one, of course, I applied to go to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria. But it's not only about what you do, but being at the right place at the right time. I call them the lucky links that brought me to semester at sea. And the lucky link here is when I arrived in Nigeria, there were 180 of us who went to Nigeria, and I was in 1/3 of the group that went to southwestern Nigeria, among the Yoruba-speaking people. And so the head of the Peace Corps there in that region, a wonderful fellow by the name of Murray Frank, said, "Are you Max?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I've got some good news and bad news." Oh boy. Well, give me the bad news first. And he said, "Well, I hate to tell you this, but that secondary school where you were going to be teaching music has decided they really don't need music. They need a science teacher. Can you teach science?" No. I was a music major. I took one science course during my undergraduate days, and I think I got a C. So I said, "No, I'm sorry." I said, "What's the good news, please?" He said, "Well, the bad news still is we're going to have to send you back to train for a different country. You're going to have to go to a different country." I said, "Well, it might be a French-speaking country. What's the good news?" He said, "Well, right now we have a Peace Corps rest house here in Ibadan, and most of the Peace Corps volunteers are out in the bush right now. They're not coming in. There's no vacation. Why don't you stick around for a couple of weeks? And maybe you can find yourself, a school that needs a music teacher." He was very flexible. He said, "Stay for 2 weeks." That doesn't usually happen. I was so lucky. I still meet with Barry Frank occasionally. He lives in Boston. So anyway, what happened? I went out to the University of Ibadan, one of the best universities in the area, and I went to the music department. Of course, they don't have a music department. And so I spoke to a number of different people, and they said, "Gee, we don't know how to help you." And finally, one of the Nigerians I spoke to said, "Yes, there is a fellow here. I think he calls himself an ethnomusicologist. He's from Great Britain, and go see if he knows about something." Long and short of this story is I ended up being his assistant for 2 years, which is a very unusual Peace Corps experience. And he did a couple of things for me. He knew that I was very interested in teaching K through 12, which I had done some training for that. And he thought it would be good if I could do a survey of music in the public schools of Abadan. So that was one of my tasks. Another one, and that's when I wasn't helping him on one of his research trips. Another one was to, I'm trying to think of the best one to tell you, because there were 3 or 4. Well, one was, I knew a little bit about church music, and there was a seminary there, a Roman Catholic seminary, that needed someone who could teach Gregorian chant, and I had learned a little bit about Gregorian chant, so I ended up teaching these seminarians a little bit about music. So that was all fine and good, and but the real, I would say, thing that changed everything right there, and this is probably the most important thing, is that I had only been in Nigeria for 2 months when the Prime Minister of Nigeria was installed as the Chancellor at the University of Ibadan. And for that great event, they had musical ensembles, traditional musical ensembles come from all over Nigeria to perform for that. So while I was busy studying the drums and the different instruments of Venezuela and teaching the seminarians, and going to many different elementary schools, especially to record some of the children's songs that they were singing, and also out in the bush sometimes to other places. This was a group out in Ekiti, Nigeria, where they had some young people who liked to perform at different schools. So that's what I was doing most of the time. But getting back to this great event when so many of these great ensembles were coming from the northern part of Nigeria, all over Nigeria, I was told by Tony King, the ethnomusicologist I worked for, well, unfortunately, I have to go up to up to Kano in northern Nigeria for the next 3 days. We had this very distinguished ethnomusicologist from the United States of America who was coming over to these ceremonies because he wanted to record some of this music. His name is Dr. Mandel Hood. Would you host him for the day? Would you take him there? So I did, and I sat next to him, and we saw these different ensembles come up. And that's Mandel Hood now, sitting up there with the gray hair, with the camera on his, and I was with him for 2 or 3 hours. And he said, what are you doing after you go to the Peace Corps in 2 more years? And I said, well, I'm not too sure. I'll probably go back to Maine and teach K through 12 or something like that, music. He said, are you at all interested in the music you hear here? I said, well, am I interested in this music? I definitely am. And these drumming and the children's music and whatnot. He said, why don't you consider becoming an ethnomusicologist? And why don't you come and do your master's degrees with me? And I said, well, I don't think I can afford to go out there, Dr. Hood. But anyway, he made it possible. He said, write to me as soon as you get back, which I did. And before long, he found scholarship money to get me out to, guess where? UCLA, Los Angeles. And for me, it was really my first experience with Latin American culture. And as I put here, Viva Mexico. When I grew up in Maine, we didn't have one Mexican food restaurant in the whole state of Maine. I never knew what Mexican food was like. And my goodness, here I was. And I had a very good friend, a fellow graduate student by the name of James Kenning. Any of you sailed back in the early 70s? Jim Kenning was the first ethnomusicologist to sail on a semester at sea. He came up to me one day and he said, hey, Max, look at this. I've been invited to teach music on this program on the ship that goes around the world. And I was very interested, but I had already decided to go someplace else, and so I couldn't do it. I didn't think it would ever happen to me, but that was my first knowledge of semester at sea. So Jim did go off, and he ended up teaching on, I think, 4 different voyages in the early 70s. And but then the place where I did find a job was eventually. Any of you been to Seattle, Washington? Let's see if I can find this. Oh yeah, here I am down at Pike Place Market, Well, here's what happened. I had another very close friend by the name of Robert Kaufman who graduated, got his PhD at UCLA a year before I did. So he moved up to Seattle to teach at UW up there. And we had a telephone conversation one day, and he said, well, how are you doing? I said, boy, am I tired being a graduate student here. It took me about 4 years to do the master's degree and all of the work for the PhD. And he said, well, why didn't you think, I know you can teach music. Why don't you come up here and, I can find a job in Seattle Public Schools. I said, well, how can you do that? He said, well, I have a very good friend who is in charge of all of the music up there in Seattle Public Schools. Her name is Barbara Reeder, and Barbara Reeder later married Elon, and his last name, Lundquist. Did any of you sail with Barbara Lundquist? Yeah. A real dynamo. Oh, that was the other stroke of luck, that I met her, because I learned so much from Barbara Reeder at that time, Barbara Lundquist. And of course, she ended up sailing, on 2 or 3 different voyages, I think. And Bob Kaufman ended up teaching on 2 voyages, I know. And there was another fellow there who was a specialist in Latin American music, Robert Garfias. And he and Bob Kaufman went on a trip to Africa, and they stopped in Venezuela on the way back. And when they came back, they told me all about Venezuela, because what also happened when I went to Los Angeles, I met the love of my life. So guess what? She's on the ship with me today, 50 years later.